Happy New Year, everybody. It's Jeremy Thake here for the Microsoft Graph team. This is the January 2019 community call. It was the first time I typed 2019 into a keyboard was when I was making the slide yesterday. This meeting is on at a different time than usual. We are usually the first Tuesday of every month at 8 a.m. But because January 1st Tuesday was the first day of the year, we decided to punt it to a working day or business working day, January 3rd, today at 9 a.m. So appreciate you making it, but if you couldn't make it and you're listening to the recording, thank you for listening on demand. This is great content, and all of the other content is available on the Microsoft Graph blog. So if you go to graph.microsoft.com in your browser and you click on blogs in the top navigation, you'll actually see there all of the different community calls we've done for the last, I guess, 18 months, 2 years now, of the various different bits of content. So if you do need to share this with everyone, the aka.ms/Microsoft Graph call link is the best way to share it on Twitter or in email with your colleagues or in Teams with your colleagues. And as I say, they are typically at 8 a.m. So the next call is February 5th at 8 a.m. So please visit back on that one. We typically talk about what's new and how you can use the graph, and we get product managers from across the board to join the call. I can see that there's a bunch of Microsoft Graph kind of big family of PMs that we have here on the call, and so the few of them will be talking today, which is great. But today, as well as some updates and just some kind of bits of content that I thought would be useful for the community to hear, Matteo is actually going to be talking about how he built an Alexa skill with Microsoft Graph, and also, more importantly, I guess probably the more complicated thing here is how you handle the auth from within the Alexa app as well. And then, because we only have one content session, usually we have two here, we'll have time for Q&A. Just be patient with us because not all the PMs from all the different workloads on the graph are here, but we'll do our best to answer those questions. So Matteo will speak in a moment, but let me just run through some quick news here. So from an updates perspective, Preeti, I believe you're on the call. Did you want to quickly talk about this Microsoft Graph Security Hackathon?
Yeah, sure. I'll be glad to. Happy New Year, everybody. I'm Preeti, and I am from the Microsoft Graph Security workload. So basically, we have our Graph Security Hackathon, which launched in December, and it's running through March. March 1st is the end date for submissions. It's hosted on DevPost, and there's a link to that. It's already 1 month past the hackathon, so there are 2 months remaining. Your submissions are welcome, and the only requirement is to use the Graph Security API, and feel free to mix and match with other Graph APIs so that you can earn extra credit for that. And also feel free to mix up with other external products and all. And it's basically, the goal is to build security solutions, and whatever would enable security management solutions, or even investigation solutions, or anything else that I can think of security wise.
Has anyone posted any hacks in a preview state already, Preeti, or are the people kind of keeping their hacks to their chest right now?
It's all in the chest right now. So yeah, we have close to around 180 odd registrants at this point.
That's great.
There are questions coming in terms of what they're thinking of. But then, yes, a lot of things, we do expect submissions to flow in the last month.
Yeah. It depends with those dev posts. If people aren't familiar with dev post, some people often will go create their hack page and be public about it just to show what they're going to be doing and share screenshots, and then they'll go away and build it, and then they'll submit the challenge nearer the end, whereas a lot of other people will be very guarded towards what they're hacking. And release those right near the deadlines to kind of secure their prizes. So if you are interested in this, please reach out, go to the graphsecurityhack.devpost.com website and take a bit of a read. It's a great way of learning the graph, and specifically this service on the Microsoft Graph as well, which is extremely cool. And if you haven't looked at the security graph before, the team, including Preeti, been on to talk about this in previous community calls as well. So you can see the demos, and there's a bunch of sample code that you can run to get Apple up and running if you're interested in doing this. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, and a quick point as well. We are having our office hours next week, which is the second office hours. We have monthly office hours for the hackathon. So if you have any questions, feel free to join the office hours. We'll post a link to that as well as a part of this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy.
And then just a quick reminder that we have moved our docs. If you had any links bookmarked from the existing Microsoft Graph documentation, it now moves over to docs.microsoft.com/graph. We have localized that content now into the 8 languages that we had localized in the old platform. And thank you for all the feedback we've been getting. It's been great in terms of seeing on the individual pages that feedback. We are in the process of just ironing out some kinks in how we get the particular doc writers to respond. But in general, the turnaround SLA has been really good. It's usually within 48 hours that the content writer will actually respond. We're either acknowledging that there is an error in the page, or that maybe we could add additional information to the content to make it more to help with some of the questions that are coming up. Just to reiterate that the feedback on the page isn't specifically for your issues with code or what you think may be bugs with the service. The feedback is really to do with the content of the documentation itself. If you have questions around your code and getting it working, stackoverflow.com with the Microsoft-Graph tag is the right place to put that. Or if you have a paid support contract, feel free to raise a support issue there. Now, one thing I wanted to show you based on that, which I didn't have open before I did, is if you go to your account, you have to be an administrator to do this inside of the Office 365 experience. But if you go over to the admin experience here in the app launcher, or Waffle as unofficially known, and you go to show more, there is a support section here where you can actually start having a discussion with either an Office 365 assistant, or you can turn the assistant off and do a search and then actually post a query in here. And then that will start a support ticket where you can actually start to see the paid support people, dedicated people come through and see your support requests and get responses here. And so anyone with an Office 365 tenant can do this. Obviously, you have to be an administrator to get into this admin center here to be able to do this. So you will need to know who your admins are that have this access to be able to do it. But if you are getting issues with the Microsoft Graph, this is the right place to do it. There is an alternate route of doing this, which is in portal.azure.com in the, not the smiley faces, in the help section here. Oh, sorry, it's the question mark. And you go help and support. And what you can actually do is go and create a new support request here. And in the type of business, you want to say it's technical support. And I think you can do, no, that's not going to work. Is Active Directory. Someone's trying to help me on IM and I can't see it. I will find it and post it, but essentially it's in here. It is a little bit buried.
You want that top one.
You want the top one. I can't select it. That one. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Dan. So Azure Active Directory, app integration and development. And then if you do it that way, that will actually give you that support. I will call out Marco De Pino, who looks like he's on a train or a plane somewhere. Hi, Marco. Thank you for putting yourself on mute. I did promise I'd call people out. I appreciate you joining the call. So those are the two ways that you can get if you have paid support. The Office 365 approach actually is for everybody. And if you're in the Azure portal, you do need Azure support to be able to have those things come through. But you are then escalating any issues directly. So our guidance is if those things are like genuine issues when you make calls that you're getting kind of server exceptions, then absolutely submit those support queries. Whereas if it's things like you're not sure how to get things working in the SDK or how to call the API, then Stack Overflow is the right place to start. That we may respond and say, okay, it's time to raise a support ticket, but that's kind of how we're fielding the levels of getting you guys help when you're trying to dev against the graph. And then if you are still trying to get started and this is your first time joining a community call, within the training content, within the documentation, we have this training content here for the various different platforms. These are essentially 4 steps. You create your project in the IDE for relevant to the platform. You go register your application in Azure Active Directory, and then you'll go add the application logic into your project using kind of the Microsoft authentication libraries, the MSAL libraries. And then you'll add the Microsoft Graph SDKs to get the underlying calendar data for the test user that you're going to use in the tutorial. And so if you're still trying to get started here with a graph, these will, from file new project in the IDE of your choice, get you running in those different languages. And we have got additional tutorials we're going to bring through from other platforms in the future as well. We did this last month and wanted to kind of just reiterate that we're doing a quick graph survey just to get an idea of where we're at in terms of sentiment and where developers are happy and where they're not happy with the graph. It helps us to prioritize where we focus our time from a developer experience team, which is the majority of people on this call from Microsoft, to understand where we have gaps or where we need to improve things or where we're doing really, really well and pat ourselves on the back a little bit. So if you don't mind just going to the aka.ms/graph survey link there, you'll actually see a few questions that'll just help us to understand where we're at. It takes 3 minutes to run. I'm pretty sure that survey is still open. I just thought that as I was going through this, but I'm pretty sure it is. If not, I will make sure it's open in a second. And then one other thing I wanted to do before handing over to Matteo was, a lot of the time I get asked, like, where do we think we're at with things and what things are top of mind for us from a developer experience perspective. And sometimes, obviously, it can be a bit risky for us to kind of share that. But I am of the approach of kind of being open with you guys on where we're working on improving. And so the reason I wanted to do this today was just to kind of highlight if there are other areas you think we should be looking at in the next kind of 3 to 6 months, purely from a kind of a developer experience, not the work that goes on in terms of the underlying services, adding API calls or shipping things from beta to V1, but more around just the all-up experience of Microsoft Graph. Please let me know. I'd love to have some conversations in the IM chat window as I throw these out here. So the first one we're kind of been aware of for a while, and we're really getting close to this now, is with this direction now that the MSAL libraries that were in V2 are in V2 in preview at the moment. We're moving towards making sure all of our content, all of our samples, and our quick starts and new tutorials are all using these as a baseline. Obviously, historically, there were the ADL libraries, which worked for certain endpoints of the auth APIs, whereas MSAL is kind of the way we're moving forward, and we're driving people along this path for a variety of different reasons we've covered on this call before. And so we are working to make that consistency there, so that when you go through any kind of documentation, samples, tutorials, that's what you see as a standard. Whereas we know we have a little bit of inconsistency at the minute where we've essentially been waiting for MSAL to GA, which I can't share any information on that right now, to kind of get that consistency up. So that's one thing we're actively working on, and we know that it can be a bit confusing right now with the difference between where people are using ADL and MSAL v1 in samples and not the latest and greatest with MSAL v2. So that's one thing we are doing. The other thing that we're actually working on, which is kind of there at the moment, is in the Azure Active Directory in the Azure portal. When I register a new application here, if I just do test 2, I think that should work. I'm just going to take the defaults. This is where I'm going to register an application, and then I'll be able to go through and set up the permissions I want to consent to, or you do it actually in code. We have this quick start section here. And in the quick start section, this will actually get you going with the various different platforms of the quick starts. And when I click on those, essentially it's going to take me through, and there's a few steps it does to actually go and make the changes to the application I just created so that it will work with ASP.NET Core. And it'll even tell me the exact code that I need to go copy into my sample projects here, and then actually show you the sample class that you would require to actually go do that authentication hop once you've got that configuration in there. And so clicking on this button, for instance, will actually allow you to make these changes to the application so that you can go put that into your code. And then you can download a sample project, an F5 in Visual Studio, and essentially have auth running against this application. Now, this experience I'm showing you here is part of the Azure AD team's work. And so this is completely blessed. It's MSA LV2, and this is like their the Azure AD teams, like this is the way they want you to be writing your code. So right now for the graph, which is the layer above that actually leverages the Azure Story applications, we have these for all the different platforms as well, but we have a slightly different quick start experience. And so in the coming months, it's very, very similar. You pick your language and then you can basically create the application on the fly and download the zip. But we're actually going to merge and be using this quick start experience. And so you'll see a lot more improvements in here. And often a lot of the times people go, well, what's the right way to do the auth? And so right now we're kind of doubling up. We're doing the same code underneath in the zip files through both approaches, but we're actually going to drive people directly to here. So that's a change you'll see shortly as well. And then from a support perspective, I have mentioned that we have those two support flows, the Office 365 admin experience flow and the Azure developer portal flow. But again, with the Stack Overflow questions, if you're using the Microsoft Graph tag, we are trying to get better at making sure our PMs and our support teams are monitoring those Stack Overflow questions because we really want to try and help you and unblock you where you're having issues. And then in addition to that, we're doing some work around the documentation. Now we're on docs.microsoft.com. We're working on how we can have SDK snippets as well as the REST example code directly in the page. And then also having the Graph Explorer built in. So when I'm on a request page for creating a Microsoft team using the post request, we'll actually be able to have a try experience there that will allow you to run a Graph Explorer from that experience with that in context and be able to share that with other people. And so it's something we're working on actively at the moment. And then in addition to that, we are looking to add more language support to our quick starts and tutorials and different other topic areas to help React and more modern Angular frameworks to use the Microsoft Graph as well. So if there are other platforms you think we're missing right now that you'd like to see, I'd love to get that feedback for you on that. And then we do hear a lot that we aren't great at communicating until after the fact. Things like when something moves from a beta to the V1 endpoint, or that there's user voice requests that are coming through and that they get kind of not responded to. You will have noticed right before the holiday break that there was probably another 200 or so that we went through, either requesting new information or moving to say it's in the backlog, or that actually it's in preview already, or that it's something we're working on right now. And so we're trying to get better as an overall Microsoft Graph product team of how we communicate what we're working on and where you as a community have been making requests on how we push that through. And we're also working on a kind of a changelog v2. So the changelog right now is part of the documentation. We cannot check anything into the service and make it live without it being in the changelog. But we know that changelog probably isn't the best if you're only using a particular service on the Microsoft Graph. And it isn't great for notifications. And so we're doing a bunch of work there to make that changelog better for you to kind of follow along with. And so with that, I'd love to be able to, at the Q&A section, if people have got questions, time to think about other things that you think we could do better from a developer experience perspective. And the reason I've said Jeremy's developer experience top of mind is because, we are a big team within the Microsoft Graph team. And these are the ones that we're driving towards in a dev experience. And there are lots of other things that people are working on. But these are the ones that there's a kind of a core dev experience team that we're driving towards these things at the moment. So definitely check those out. So today we have Matteo Pagini. And did I pronounce that right? Pagini? It's Matteo there. Please, Matteo.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, excellent. I can hear you now.
No, it's Pagani, actually. It's like the car.
Sorry.
The car brand.
Nice. Not a family relation there.
No, unfortunately, no.
And so you've been doing some work along the lines of building an Alexa skill that is actually authorizing through into Microsoft Graph. Was this a personal project you'd put together, or is this something that...
Yes, kind of, meaning that it's like a mix of something related to my job, because in my team we work with partners to help them to enable Microsoft 365 experiences on Windows. So working with the graph is one of the activities we do. And the other thing was personal interest about Alexa, because I know that for the US world, it's an old product, but in Italy, it was released like 3 months ago. So
I often have to forget that. Like, I came from Australia where we got everything last, and now I'm spoiled being in the States where things, like Alexa come through. So yeah, it's interesting to see how it's spreading across the continent.
So they did the last release of Alexa was in Spain and Italy, and it happened at the end of October of 2018.
So you call it Alexa as well?
Yes, it's called Alexa as well. But finally, I can speak also in Italian. Or at least my family can speak. For me, speaking in English is not a big deal, but for my family, it's more familiar to interact with a device that speaks your own native language. So
yeah. Well, look, I'll let you take over the presentation, and I appreciate you doing this on your break as well. I know you're not officially at work today, so thank you for taking your time to share this with us today.
Welcome. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I hope everyone is able to see the screen.
Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint, not the presentation.
Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, can I go on? Can you see everything is okay? Okay, perfect. So basically, well, I think most of you hopefully should be familiar with Alexa. It's the vocal assistant released by Amazon in 2014 in the US and then rolled out in other countries in the world. The main difference between Alexa and other digital assistants is that it's tightly coupled with physical devices. If other assistants like Google Home, Siri, or Cortana are more linked to a mobile or desktop platform, Alexa has been released as an assistant for smart speakers, even if now they have also opened the gate to more complex devices with a screen, so adding also a visual component. And pretty much like on a smartphone, you have some built-in features, and then if you want to do more, you install applications from a store. The same applies to Alexa. So with Alexa, you can do some basic stuff without adding anything extra, like playing music from Spotify, setting a timer, controlling smart home devices. But if you want to do more, you have the opportunity to install Alexa skills, which are basically applications that can add other voice commands to the basic ones provided by Alexa. As a developer, you can build these Alexa skills. And if you have some experience with the bot framework by Microsoft, the experience is pretty much the same. You don't have to care about all the machine learning model behind the recognition. So you don't have to understand the sentence, identify a pattern, try to identify the important keywords. Everything is done by the Alexa servers through some services like speech recognition, natural language understanding, text-to-speech. What your skill receives is only the command that has been triggered. So basically, the Alexa development model is the user sends a command to the device. The device sends the command to the Amazon services. They parse the command, and then your backend, which handles the skill, receives a request. You perform, you take the appropriate actions, and then you send back a response. A model, an Alexa skill is built by two components. The first one is the interaction model, which is basically a JSON file which defines how the user can interact with your skill. There are some key concepts around the interaction model. The first one is the invocation name, which is the name of the skill, and it's critical because when it comes to features that are natively supported by Alexa, you don't have to do anything special. For example, you can just say, Alexa, play the last album by Coldplay on Spotify, and that's it. When it comes instead to third-party skills, like a skill that you can build, you need to first open the skill so that every other command can be forwarded to your skill and not to the standard Alexa commands. So for example, if you set as invocation name BBC Word, to start interacting with the skill, you would say, Alexa, open BBC Word. So as you can imagine, finding the right invocation name is very important. Then you have the opportunity to define one or more intents, and an intent is a command, an action that you want to send to the skill. And an intent is associated to one or more phrases. All these phrases, they belong to the same intent because they are different ways to express the same idea, the same concept. An example of an intent could be latest news, and one sentence could be, Alexa, open BBC World and tell me the latest news. You can have other sentences like, and tell me the latest, and tell me what's happening all around the world, all the variations of this sentence. Optionally, you can have also slots, which are a way to add parameters to an intent. So Alexa, open BBC World and tell me the latest news about technology. Technology is a parameter because I can say about politics, about economics, about science, about any other category of news. And to build this interaction model, the simplest way, which is the one we're going to see in a few minutes in the demo, is with a web interface. It's a portal called Alexa Developer Portal. But if you are more a command line guy, there is also a command line interface tool, which, by the way, it's also supported by an official extension by Amazon for Visual Studio Code. So you can deploy and build this interaction model very quickly. Once you have defined the interaction model, you need a backend which is able to receive these commands and parse them. And this backend is basically, you have the freedom of choosing what you prefer, because
sì, dai, dopo te la giro. Ora guarda, sta riandando via internet un'altra volta, quindi.
Okay, so
Io allora.
Okay, so Amazon provides a set of built-in SDKs for helping you building a skill with Node.js, Python, Can you hear me? Can you hear everyone? I was muted.
Yeah, we can hear you, Mattia.
Okay, sorry. As I was saying, Amazon provides some built-in SDK for working with Node.js, Python, and Java, and you have built-in support in the cloud platform by Amazon, AWS, for building functions, lambdas, the serverless platform for supporting these skills. But in the end, basically, when you develop a skill, basically, the way the skill works is that Alexa sends a HTTP post request to a URL, the URL of your skill, of your endpoint, with a payload in JSON with all the information about the request. So as you can imagine, you don't have any limitation about the technology that you can use to build this skill, because any technology support this kind of communication. So you can use any framework, any programming language, any backend, whatever you need. Since I'm a Microsoft developer, I work with C# and Microsoft technologies since a long time. I started to investigate which could be the best way for me to build an Alexa skill, and I came up with a combination that allows me to use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, C# thanks to Alexa.net, which is an open source library which translates all the JSON objects, the methods, and the APIs by Alexa into C# stuff. And then the easiest way for me to deploy a skill is using Azure Function. As I said, it's just an HTTP endpoint, so you can use everything. It can be an Azure App Service, it can be a virtual machine with a website, but Azure Function is the best approach because the skill is not made by a lot of endpoints, a complex configuration. It's a single endpoint which receives HTTP request. Azure Function is great for this because it's cheap, it scales very well, it's super easy to maintain, so it's the perfect companion. On top of this, Marco Minerva, who is an Italian MVP friend of mine, has built a template for Visual Studio. You can find it on the marketplace. There's the link at the end of the slide. And basically, it's a template to create an Azure function with an Azure function with all the information you need to build an Alexa skill. Especially, it contains the implementation of built-in intents, security validation, and multiple languages. Some of these features, like the built-in intents and the security validation, are a requirement to satisfy if you want to publish this skill on the Alexa store, and you need to pass the certification. But let's talk about the Microsoft Graph. One of the things I wanted to do during my experiment was to identify the user. So there are skills like I don't know, weather. They are generic skills. Alexa, how is the weather in Seattle? You don't need to identify the user to do that. But what if I want to enable the power of the Microsoft Graph to, I don't know, give access through an Alexa skill to calendars, tasks, mails, OneDrive. In this case, I need to identify the user because I need to know who is the user that is logged in on the Microsoft Graph. And in order to do this, Alexa supports the concept of account linking. When you enable account linking, basically you are able to ask to the user to authenticate to a third-party service when he enables the skill on his account. The account linking process is based on the OAuth protocol, the 2.0 version. And once the service is linked to the skill, basically in the body of the request, you will receive the access token, which is the one you need to start performing operations on the APIs exposed by the service. So in the flow, what happens is that when you enable the skill, you send an authorization request to the service. And what happens in the case of the Microsoft Graph is that the user will be asked to authenticate with his Microsoft account or Azure Office 365 account. Once you have a valid authorization grant, you can request an access token. And then if the overall authentication is complete with success, the access token starts to get injected inside the body of the skill so that you can start performing real operation with the Microsoft Graph. Once you have that, sky's the limit. As you know, the power of the Microsoft Graph is unlimited, and it's expanding its reach inside the Microsoft ecosystem more and more. So you can build basically everything you want around these APIs. Let's see a demo. In my case, I'm going to build a very simple skill to interact with OneDrive. So I want to build a skill to ask, to provide a way to the user to easily understand the available space he has on OneDrive. So this is the Amazon portal. You create a skill. In this case, I've already set up the skeleton of a skill. The first step is to set up the invocation model in the invocation name, so the one that the user will say. In this case, I set OneDrive quota, so the user will say, Alexa, open OneDrive quota to invoke my skill. And then I can create one or more intents. In this case, I've created an intent called quota, and these are the sample sentences that I can say to trigger this intent. As you can see, they are all different variations of the same sentence. So how much free space I have, how much data I have, tell me my quote on OneDrive. They all relate to the same action. I want to know how much free space I have on my OneDrive account. Once I build the interaction model, I can move to the backend. And for the backend, I can use this project template, which I mentioned during the slides. I've already installed it in my Visual Studio, and when you create an Alexa skill with this template, basically you get an Azure function. This is an Azure function. This is the function name. It has only one important method, which is the run method, which is the one triggered when the Azure function is invoked, and it's connected to the HTTP trigger because the function must run when I receive the HTTP request from the Amazon servers. These skills this function already uses Alexa.net. So what happens here is that I read from the body of the HTTP request the JSON, and I get a skill request object which maps all the properties of the request. So from this object, I can understand everything I need to take the appropriate action. This is an I saw the question on the chat. This is a Azure function, and in my case, I'm using Visual Studio, but it works perfectly fine also with Visual Studio Code. You have all the integration and templates also for Visual Studio Code. For example, what I can do is that I want to understand which kind of event triggered the activation of the skill, and this is performed thanks to the request object, which is inside the skill request. From here, I can understand which type is this request. I can have multiple types. The most important ones I need to handle are launch request, which means the user has said, Alexa, open OneDrive quota, and the intent request, which instead means that the user is trying to use a specific intent. In my case, it could be, I want to know how much space I have on OneDrive. As you can see, thanks to this library, it's very easy to perform operations and to understand what's happening, because everything, I'm not manually dealing with the JSON and with HTTP responses, but I'm using plain C# objects. Now I wanted to integrate the Microsoft Graph, so I need to enable the account linking. Account linking is enabled in the Alexa Developer Console here. I can choose account linking. And I'm asked to specify all the various information of my OAuth endpoint. So the authorization URI, the access token URI, the client ID, the client secret, and so on. So in order to move on with this step, I need to go to my Azure portal and connect to the app registration section, which Jeremy showed you before during his presentation. So I can go to Azure Active Directory. I can move to the app registration preview. In this case, I've already created an app registration here. And here I will find all the information I need to fill the Amazon portal. So let's take a look. First, I need the authorization URI and the access token URI. I can find them in the endpoint section. So I can open endpoints, and here you can see I have the authorization endpoint and the token endpoint. I just copy this one inside here. Then I need the client ID, and the client ID, it's here in the, it's the unique identifier of my skill, so I can, of my application, so I can just copy and paste it from here. The client secret, which I can generate in the certificates and secrets section. I can generate a new client secret, and once I get the value, I can copy it here. And then I can specify the scope, which are the features of the Microsoft Graph I want to leverage. You can do this in the API permissions. You can explore all the scopes which are available in the Microsoft Graph, and you can enable the one you need based on the features you want to enable. So, for example, if you want to give access to the OneDrive files, you can enable the files scope, or if you want to access to the calendar appointments, you can look under the calendar section, and so on. The only thing you need to do on the other way around is that when you implement the OAuth authentication flow, you need to specify which are the endpoints which are invoked when the authentication is successful. In this case, the endpoints are provided directly by Amazon. So in this page, I can see the redirect URLs, which I need to copy inside the authentication section here of my application. So as you can see, I just copied these 3 endpoints here in the redirect URIs of my application. That's it. Now you just have to save. And once you have done that, what happens is that if you log in to your Amazon Alexa application, sorry if the portal is in Italian, but since my Alexa is in Italian, automatically this gets translated, and there's no way to change it in English. You can access to the skills section, your skills, and here you have this section which is titled Skills for Developers. Here you have the list of all the skills that are not public yet, but they are linked to your developer account. And as you can see, the OneDrive quota skill is highlighting me that this yellow message is saying, hey, you need to link an account, because I specified that my skill can't work if I don't link a third-party account. So when I try to enable that, I start the OAuth flow. So since if I have configured everything correctly, I'm being redirected to the Microsoft account login, because I've set up the Microsoft account endpoints, the MSA AL endpoints. In this case, I've enabled the endpoint to support both Microsoft account and Office 365 account. So I can just log in this case with my personal Microsoft account. And if I've done everything correctly, I get this message that says, your skill OneDrive quota has been linked with success to your account. In fact, here I can see that now the skill is enabled. What happened is that now I can start testing my skill, and I can start seeing what happens when I enable this kind of behavior. Now, you could have a question, how can I test my skill? Because the problem is that when you are ready to publish your skill, you need to go to the endpoint section and specify the HTTP endpoint where your skill will be available. In my case, it's an Azure function, so the easiest way would be to publish this Azure function. However, as you can imagine, this can slow down a bit the debugging, because if I find an issue, I need to make the changes and then publish the Alexa skill again. Also, the debugging might be not super straightforward. I need to add a logging, check the logs, and so on. So the best way for me is to use a tool called ngrok. This is the official website, which basically takes care of exposing a port and an application running on your local machine through a public URL on the web. So in this case, I can just run the skill on the local Azure Function emulator. So I just press F5 in Visual Studio. The skill gets compiled, and then it gets executed using the local emulator, which basically exposes this skill to a local endpoint. We will see now the command line starting up, and in a few seconds we should see that now this skill is ready to listen on the localhost machine through the port 7071. So this is the local endpoint of my machine. So I can open a command prompt, in this case PowerShell. I've already installed the ngrok on my machine, so I can say ngrok, I want to expose HTTP protocol on the 7071 port. The tool starts, and now you can see that my web interface is being exposed to these two endpoints. I take the HTTPS one because supporting HTTPS is a requirement for the Alexa skill. I put it here with the full endpoint, so API OneDrive skill, and I save the endpoints. Now I can start testing the skill with the local code I have. So I can, for example, go here, set a breakpoint here. I can go to the test environment, to the test tool, which is basically a way to type or pronounce commands which are delivered to your skill. And here I can say open OneDrive quota. And if everything goes well, I should see my breakpoint being it in Visual Studio. Let's see if I'm lucky enough. The first time it always takes a while because the function it's just started. Okay, took too long to respond. Let me try again. Strange. Let me see if I've passed the endpoint correctly. So this is the base endpoint. Let's copy and paste it again just to be double sure. So let's close this. So endpoint. Okay, yes, the endpoint seems to be correct. Let's try again. Maybe it was just bad luck. Of course, I tested this before and it was working perfectly. So open OneDrive quota. Let's try again.
Oh, Matteo, your function is blocked because you have selected something in the console. Open the console of your function and yeah, escape.
Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see. Okay, let's try again now that we have unblocked the function. Okay, now it might be a little bit stuck because there were too much stuff pending. Okay, let's try to stop and restart this again so that we clear the queue of messages that was stuck in the console. Okay, the emulator is starting again. Now I try to not touch the
We can see, Matteo, that your CPUs are nicely spiking in the bottom there too now.
Yeah, probably the video streaming, the desktop streaming and everything is creating a little bit of a bottleneck. Oh,
thanks, Vincent, for spotting that as well.
Let's try again. Okay, now I see the method coming in. Okay, okay, we made it. So the breakpoint is being hit, and in the JSON, if we explore the JSON, we can see that, no, let's use this one, which is a little bit nicer. We can see that basically we have all the information about the request. So we can see, for example, that it was a launch request because we just said open the name of the skill. But more importantly, we can see that in the session user access token, we have the full access token, which was provided by the graph, by the authentication through my Microsoft account, so through the account linking, which gets stored inside session user access token. So this is the very long access token that we can now use to perform operation against the Microsoft Graph. In this case, my skill is an Azure function built in C#, built on top of .NET Core. So I can just install, if I look at the content of the packages installed on this skill, you will see that I've just installed the Microsoft Graph client for .NET. So here I've added an helper method, which creates a new Graph Service Client object. The only key feature here is that when I initialize this object, I pass as authorization header the token you have just seen. So the one that the Alexa has injected me inside the skill. And now I have an authenticated graph client object, and sky's the limit. I can do whatever I want with the graph endpoints. So for example, in the launch request, instead of just saying hello, I want to say hello followed by the name and the surname of the user. So I can use the graph client to interact with the me endpoint. I do a request to the me endpoint. And in the welcome message, I add the display name property of the response I get from the me endpoint. So now I've disabled the breakpoint. And if I can try again, open OneDrive quota. Previously, the request skill took too long to respond because you have to reply to in a short amount of time, and since I put the breakpoint, everything was stuck. So open OneDrive quota. Now the request should come through, and as you can see, the response was welcome to the skill Matteo Pagani, because it was able to get through the graph the information about my name in the Microsoft account. And now you can do other, for example, other stuff. For example, if you remember, the original idea was to create a skill to get the OneDrive quota. So here in the block where I check if it's an intent request, I check if the intent request invoked this quota. So the user is pronounced one of the sentences like, tell me how much space I have on OneDrive. And in this case, I use the same graph client to access to the me/drive endpoint. From this endpoint, I get a drive object, and I can access to the quota property to get all the values about the remaining space, the used space, and so on. So if I come back to my simulator, I can say open OneDrive quota and tell me how much free space I have. So now I can jump directly to the intent, and as you can see, it's working perfectly. You have 93 gigabytes, 30 gigabytes left. In this case, it's connected to my personal Microsoft account, so it's retrieving the data from my personal Office 365 subscription. As you can see, this tool is helpful also to understand what's happening, because you can see the JSON that is sent to your skill, and this is the JSON I've returned back to Alexa. However, you don't have, thanks to C# and the Alexa.NET, you don't have to manually work with all this JSON stuff, because you can just use these C# objects and methods to pass the request and send back a response. And that's pretty much it. As you can see, building this kind of skills is not super complicated because all the authentication flow is handled directly by Amazon. You just need to provide the right configuration for the OAuth 2.0 flow. You don't have to take care of manually hitting the endpoints. What you get is just an access token, and from there, you can just perform any kind of Microsoft Graph calls, of course, based on the authentication options you have requested. So if you want to integrate with the calendar, you have to make sure that the scope, the right scope have been configured inside the application. This is a set of resources that you can leverage if you want to learn more. I highlight just a couple of them. The first one is the Alexa skill project template, the one I've used to make easier building the infrastructure of my function. And the other one is the blog of my team. In there, you will find 4 or 5 blog posts I wrote about this. So if you want more, if you want to know more, and if you want to follow some step-by-step tutorials in a more relaxed way, you can find some resources there. And that's it. Thanks for listening and for your patience.
Excellent. Thanks, Matteo. That was absolutely awesome. I am already thinking about a bunch of different ones I'd like to write, like cancel all my meetings for today would be the first one I can think of, where it just go and use the calendar endpoint just to delete all the meetings for the rest of my calendar day, which would be great. The whole like go nuclear approach would be awesome. So I really appreciate the level of depth you went through, even with the debugging. I hadn't thought about that with ngrok, but that would make things super useful for local debugging as well. So
yeah,
I really
in my case, I used it for the for Alexa skills, but ngrok is a must-have tool for any time you have to test endpoints which should be exposed on the internet, but instead they are local on your machine.
Yeah, it saves that hop of publishing it to Azure Functions to test it and attaching a debugger and things. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, look, appreciate that. I know that's not your first language, and your English is amazing as well. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Taking us through that today. That was excellent. So just to wrap up for the call, just from some community contributions, I actually discovered Matteo's post online through Twitter with the hashtag of Microsoft Graph, and that's how I found Matteo in the organization of Microsoft and how broad it is, and invited him to come present on this call. So if there are other people out there running about Microsoft Graph and you aren't using the Microsoft Graph hashtag, or you don't see myself adding you to the thank you list at the end of the calls, use this as an application board to get your blogs visibility. Vardaman is actually now an MVP that when we were doing the podcasts a few years ago, he'd be blogging and we'd be mentioning his blogs in the podcast, and it was bringing him a lot of traffic, and we'd be retweeting them on our different handles that we have here within the Microsoft Graph team. So if you are blogging about the Microsoft Graph, please let me know. And if you're not appearing in these lists, Vardaman has actually agreed to come on in the February show to talk a little bit about the different application permission or flows that he uses with SharePoint Online and the Microsoft Graph and the new SPFX Microsoft Graph client. So if you're doing anything with SharePoint Dev and the Graph, that's definitely one I'd encourage you to kind of jump on next month and see. We are still looking for another presenter. If you are interested in presenting something you're doing with the Graph, please reach out to me. It's jthake@microsoft.com. And then we do have a weekly podcast. We've had our holiday hiatus. We're about to kickstart the 2019 episodes, but we had some really good episodes recently talking about isolated web parts, authentication with Luca and Pat from the engineering team just down the hill here in building 36, and with Anthony and Lee on the Microsoft Graph notifications. So we do try and get as many PMs on there as possible to talk. And just recently, Paul Schaeflein actually interviewed Eric Schups about kind of enterprise development and how some tips and tricks around that. So we'll be doing more around the M365 developer podcast that's available on iTunes and Google Play and Pocket Cast and everywhere else you'd expect a podcast to be shown. Again, our next call will be back at its usual time of 8 a.m. On the first Tuesday of February on the 5th. All the recordings will be available on our YouTube channel, the Office Dev YouTube channel, as well as the blog, the Microsoft Graph blog, which is at graph.microsoft.com. A big thank you for everyone who joined today. Happy New Year. Appreciate you guys joining so early in the new year. And thank you again to Matteo for joining on his day off. I really appreciate that. You've absolutely crushed that demo. So thank you again. And hopefully we'll see you all in February, and enjoy ramping back up into work after having all that lovely time off over the holiday period. Thanks very much, guys. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.